"Don't touch that podium." My brother said it loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. People turned. A few guests near the registration table looked over at us, and I felt every single one of those eyes land on me like a weight I hadn't asked to carry. I was 34 years old. I had driven 4 hours to be there. And I was standing in the lobby of the Hargrove Convention Center in Charlotte while my older brother held his arm out in front of me like I was about to walk into traffic. My name is Yvette, and for most of my life, I let my brother decide where I was allowed to stand. My brother's name is Curtis. He's 6 years older than me, and he has always carried himself like those 6 years gave him some kind of permanent authority over my life. Growing up, he was the one who got the praise, the claps at the dinner table, the nods from our father. He was good at school and loud about it. He remembered his grades, his awards, his teen wins. He kept them close, like coins he could count whenever the room felt too quiet. I was quieter about my work, always had been. I didn't announce things before they were done. I didn't need the room to look at me before I felt like what I was doing mattered. Our father understood, Curtis. They spoke the same language, loud, confident, immediate results. I don't think my father ever learned how to read the quieter kind of progress. The kind that doesn't show up until years later when suddenly the pieces come together and you realize someone built something real while nobody was paying attention. My mother was different. She noticed. She would sit with me at the kitchen table when I was in college and ask real questions. Not just how are your grades, but what are you working on? What are you learning? What do you want to do with this? She meant it every time. She remembered my answers the next week. She was the one who showed up to things without being asked, who kept clippings in a folder, who bought an extra copy of the local paper when my name appeared in it for the first time. My father clapped. He always clapped. But clapping is easy. What I wanted was for him to understand what he was clapping for. I'm not sure he ever did. And my brother, Curtis, took his cues from our father in almost everything, including how to see me. For years I had been working in public health policy. I started at the county level, moved to state, spent 3 years consulting on federal initiatives around maternal health access in underserved communities. It wasn't the kind of work that made headlines, but it mattered. It changed things in ways that took time to see. The program I helped design in 2019 was still running in 11 states. I had co-authored a paper that got cited more times than I'd ever expected. I had sat across the table from legislators and made the case for funding that kept clinics open in places where they were the only option for miles. But when Curtis talked about me at family dinners, he kept it simple. Yvette does something in healthcare. That was it. That was the whole sentence. He never asked me to explain more, and he never volunteered more than that. I used to wonder if he didn't know what I did, or if he did know, and just decided it wasn't worth explaining. I think it was the second one. I think Curtis had a picture of me in his mind, from when I was 22, and fresh out of undergrad and still figuring things out, and he just never updated it. To him, I was still his little sister who borrowed his textbooks and needed rides to the airport. The conference in Charlotte was the National Symposium on Health Equity. It happened every 2 years. I had attended before as a presenter on 2 separate occasions, but this year was different. This year I had been named one of the keynote speakers. The invitation had come 8 months earlier, and I had spent those 8 months preparing the kind of talk that I hoped would actually move something in the people who heard it. My mother knew. She had known since the day I got the call, because she was the first person I called. She cried a little. She made me tell her exactly what it meant, who else had keynoted before, what the audience would look like, how big the room was. She listened to all of it, and then she said, "I always knew they'd figure out who you were." Curtis knew I was attending the conference. What he didn't know, because I hadn't told him, because I knew how he'd react, and I didn't feel like hearing it, was that I wasn't attending as a guest. He found out I'd be in Charlotte because my mother mentioned it at Sunday dinner the week before. She didn't give details. She just said I'd be speaking. Curtis nodded and said something like, "Yvette always finds ways to stay busy," and then moved on to talking about his own work, which he could talk about for 45 minutes without pausing. He was also attending the conference. He works in hospital administration, has for 12 years, and events like this one fall into his professional calendar the same way they fall into mine. He texted me 2 days before and said he'd see me there. Just that. No looking forward to it. No what are you presenting on. Just see you there, like we were going to run into each other at a grocery store. I drove to Charlotte alone. I liked the drive. 4 hours of highway through Georgia and into North Carolina, coffee in a thermos, the kind of podcast that makes you think without wearing you out. I needed that time before walking into a room full of people who knew my work. I always needed a little quiet before something big. I arrived at the convention center around noon on the first day. I had already checked into my hotel, and I had a meeting with the event coordinator at 1 to walk through the stage setup, the microphone, the slide deck timing. I was wearing the blazer I bought specifically for the trip, a deep plum color that my mother had pointed out in a store window on a visit 6 months earlier and said, "That's the one, that's your speaking blazer." She was right, the way she usually was about those things. I walked through the main lobby toward the registration area, rolling my bag beside me, badge already printed and waiting at the will call table according to the email they'd sent. And then I saw Curtis. He was standing near the far end of the lobby with a small group of colleagues, dressed in the charcoal suit he wore to every professional event I could remember, holding a coffee cup, laughing at something someone had said. He spotted me at almost the same moment I spotted him. He raised a hand in a half wave. I walked toward him, because there was no reason not to. We were family. That still meant something to me even when it felt complicated. He said hello. He introduced me to the two people with him, colleagues from his hospital system, I gathered, though I didn't catch their names. He introduced me as his sister, nothing else. Just my sister Yvette. The two colleagues were polite, nodded, moved on in their conversation. Curtis started asking me something about the drive up. That's when I noticed the event staff beginning to set up near the back of the lobby. There was a small elevated platform there, just 2 steps up, a podium with the symposium logo on it, a standing mic, a banner. A few staff members in navy polos were arranging chairs in a loose half circle in front of it. It was one of the pre-conference welcome areas, where they'd do brief opening remarks before the main sessions began. I recognized one of the staff members from the email chain I'd been on for the past month. She was the one who'd handled all of my logistics, who had confirmed my slide deck format and asked about my preferred mic type and sent me the parking validation. I lifted my hand to catch her attention, and that was the moment Curtis decided to speak. "Don't touch that podium." He said it the way he used to say things to me when I was a teenager trying to use the computer he considered his. Not mean, exactly, but certain. Like the words were already true before they left his mouth. I looked at him. "That's for the keynote speakers," he said, quieter this time but still firm. He glanced at the two colleagues beside him, making sure they'd registered his helpfulness. "You don't want to get in the way of setup. Come on, let's go find the registration table." I was so used to this. That's the thing I keep coming back to when I try to explain it to people who haven't lived it. I was so used to being managed by him in exactly this way. Not with cruelty, but with this easy, unchallenged assumption that he understood my situation better than I did. That for one brief second I almost let it go. Almost. I didn't say anything. I looked at him for a moment and then I looked back across the lobby. The staff member had seen me by then. She said my name from across the lobby with a warmth that made a few people nearby glance over. She started walking toward us, smiling, hand already extended. "Dr. Mercer," she said, "we've been getting everything ready for you. Do you have a minute? I just want to confirm a few things about the room setup for tonight." Curtis's hand stopped moving. The coffee cup in his other hand didn't move either. He stood exactly where he was, in the middle of a sentence that no longer existed, and I watched the recognition arrive on his face slowly, like light through a clouded window. The two colleagues looked at me differently. Not dramatically. They were professionals, and they kept it together. But the shift was real. I saw it. Curtis did too. I excused myself and stepped forward to greet her. We talked for a few minutes about the evening program, the order of speakers, the way the room would be configured. She handed me an updated schedule and told me there was a green room where keynote speakers could wait before going on. She used the word keynote twice in 90 seconds. I didn't look at Curtis while she and I talked. I didn't need to. When she stepped away to help with another detail, I turned back toward where my brother had been standing. His two colleagues had drifted toward the registration table. Curtis was still there. He was holding his coffee cup with both hands now, which he only does when he's not sure what to do with himself. I walked back over to him. I wasn't angry. That surprised me, honestly. I had imagined a moment like this before. Not this exact scenario, but something like it. And in those imagined versions I usually felt triumphant or vindicated, or at least quietly satisfied. What I actually felt was tired. Not the tired of someone who'd driven 4 hours. The tired of someone who had been waiting a very long time for something they couldn't even fully name. He said, "I didn't know." 3 words. He said them to the middle distance, not quite at me. I said, "I know you didn't." He looked at me then. His face was doing something complicated. Curtis is not a man who shows a lot, which is something we have in common, even though people never notice it in him the same way they notice it in me. When he's caught off guard, his jaw tightens a little and his eyes go very still, like he's running through something internally and trying not to let it show on the outside. Keynote, he said. Like he was testing the word. Keynote, I confirmed. He exhaled through his nose. He looked toward the podium and then back at me. He said, "Your mother didn't tell me." I almost smiled at that, the way he said your mother. As though in this moment, she belonged to me and not to him too. She probably figured I'd tell you myself, I said. I probably should have. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then, how long have you been doing this kind of thing? That question, out of everything he could have asked. Not what is the talk about, or congratulations, or even when did this happen. How long have you been doing this kind of thing? As though it were possible that all of it had begun recently. As though there were some version of events in which he had simply missed a few months of my life rather than a decade and a half of it. I said. A while, Curtis. I left him there and went to find the green room. The talk that evening went well. I knew it before it was over, the way you sometimes know. The room was full. Somewhere around 300 people. And they were quiet in the way an audience goes quiet when they're actually listening, not just being polite. I talked about the gap between what health policy promises and what it delivers to the communities it's supposedly designed for. I talked about the 18 months I'd spent in rural Mississippi, trying to understand why a program that looked good on paper wasn't reaching the people it needed to reach. I talked about what I'd learned and what I'd changed, and what I thought needed to change next. When it was over, people came up to the stage. That always surprised me a little, even after it had happened before. Someone shook my hand and said it was the most honest talk they'd heard at one of these in years. A young woman, early career, asked if she could send me an email. A man who ran a health department in Ohio said he was going to share the recording with his whole team. I stood there and received all of it, and tried to stay present in it, instead of letting my mind run ahead to the drive home, or the draft sitting open on my laptop. At some point, I became aware that Curtis was standing at the edge of the crowd. He'd been in the main auditorium for the keynote. I had seen him take a seat in the 4th row before I went backstage. And now he was waiting, the way people wait for someone after a performance, not quite sure what to do with their hands. He let the others clear out first. He's always been careful about how things look. When it was just a few of us left, he walked up to where I was standing. He said that was good. He said it like it cost him something. I know that might sound uncharitable, but that's what it felt like. Not a performance. He's not theatrical enough for that. Just something that required more effort than usual to release. I said, thank you. He looked at the stage behind me, at the symposium banner and the empty chairs. He said, I had no idea what you were doing. I mean, I knew you were in policy, but I didn't understand what that actually meant. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said to him, did you ever ask? The question was quiet. I wasn't trying to cut him, but he heard it the way he was supposed to hear it, which was not as an attack, but as a real question with a real answer that neither of us was going to pretend didn't exist. He didn't answer right away. He pressed his lips together and looked at the floor. Curtis, who always had something to say. Curtis, who had an opinion on my career and my choices and my timing and my approach for as long as I could remember. Standing there with nothing, I said, I'm not asking you to feel bad about it. I'm asking you to think about it. We stood there for a moment in the clearing room, the staff beginning to fold up the chairs behind us. He said, I think I've been carrying a version of you that stopped updating at some point. That surprised me. It was a more honest thing than I expected from him in that particular moment. I thought about what to say. I thought about all the versions of that conversation I'd rehearsed in my head over the years. All the things I'd wanted to say at dinner tables and family gatherings and phone calls that ended too quickly. I said, the version you were carrying. She needed you to believe in her too, before anyone else could see it. He looked at me. He nodded once, slowly, the way someone nods when they're absorbing something rather than agreeing with it. He said, I know. I believed him. We walked out of the convention center together and found a diner 2 blocks away that was still open and ordered coffee and eggs and sat in a booth by the window. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. It wasn't everything fixed in a single evening. What it was the first conversation between us that felt real in a way I hadn't felt since we were kids. He asked me questions, real ones. He asked about Mississippi, about the federal work, about the paper I'd co-authored. He asked how I'd gotten interested in maternal health specifically, and I told him about a woman I'd met during my first year in the county system, who had driven 47 miles to prenatal care every month, because there was no closer option, and what that had done to something in me that I'd never been able to shake. He listened. He actually listened. And I thought about the fact that I was 44 years old and sitting in a diner with my brother at midnight, and this was maybe the first time that had ever happened. Not the diner, not the midnight, but the listening. We paid the check and walked back toward the hotel. At some point he said, "I told Dad you were speaking here." He asked me how big the audience was. I stopped walking for just a second. "What did you tell him?" Curtis said. "I said I'd let him know. But I'm going to tell him it was big." That made me laugh. Not a huge laugh, but a real one. And Curtis smiled too, the way he used to when we were kids and something landed right between us, genuinely, without any calculation in it. In the months after Charlotte, something shifted. Not everything. My father still summarized my work in ways that made it sound smaller than it was. But he started asking different questions. My brother started texting differently. Not just logistics, but things like, "I mentioned your Mississippi work to a colleague today," or "I told my team about the program you designed." Small things, but different. I stopped waiting to be seen in the way I had always wanted to be seen. I think that's the real ending, not the podium moment, not the diner booth, not any single conversation. It was the morning I woke up and realized I hadn't measured my week by whether anyone in my family had acknowledged what I was doing. I was building something real. I knew it was real. I had known that for a long time. The moment at that convention center lobby didn't make me something I wasn't before. It didn't hand me my value or confirm my worth or prove anything that hadn't already been proven in 10 years of quiet, steady work. What it did was make it impossible for one person to keep looking away. And I was finished spending my energy on people who needed the world to point at me before they could see me. I already knew exactly who I was. I had known for years. The rest of the world was just catching up.